If you feel like the real estate industry has been chaotic over the last couple of years, you are not alone. A lot of seasoned agents and brand new agents are rolling with the punches on a daily basis. Some of them are losing their minds online in open forums when it comes to things like the NAR lawsuits and professionalism in our industry. Albeit go into a private realtor Facebook group, it can be a dumpster fire in the comments. So I figured on today's episode of Prime People, I would bring on Leigh Brown to discuss professionalism in real estate, how you can really separate yourself from the crowd. And really, when I think about the Prime People podcast, we are speaking specifically to real estate agents. And in my mind, it's an agent's like going from 10 to 15 deals a year to 50 to 200 plus, or seasoned agents that are maybe jaded with the industry and trying to get re-inspired. I met Leigh on an app called Clubhouse when nothing in the world was happening. We got to parlay and talk about professionalism in our industry. And one thing that I really liked about Leigh, she has a ton of experience. She's an author. She's a speaker. She has an amazing podcast that I'll mention later on. But more than that, we had multiple conversations around her involvement from a board level. She was the president of the North Carolina Board of Realtors. She was very involved in saying, like, listen, you guys are all shaking your fist at the storm. Why don't you do something about it? And during that time, I sat on professional standards, MLS advisory, and brokerage advisory myself. And I can tell you it is one of the most critical things that helped shape my career. So we're going to start with that, Leigh. Why don't you give a little bit of your background and how you even ended up as the president of your board?
Well, it's an honor to be with you, Justin, and with all of your listeners. And I always love being introduced right after you mentioned the dumpster fire of comments, because that is what everything feels like right now. And from my position today, I'm 24 years into my full-time business. I had nothing to do with volunteer life and association, anything, until 2009. And my goal prior to that point was to be number one. All I wanted to do was sell more houses. And I was driving. I got there, number one agent in the Charlotte market, but then the recession hit. And as everybody remembers, that recessionary era was houses on the market for over a year and no buyers. And it was the phone just not ringing, and foreclosures and short sales and just all the drama. And at that moment, I got a phone call from a volunteer down at the association who said, we need you to invest in the political action work. And I said, what is that? And they said, just give us $99. And so I did. And I hung up the phone and didn't think anything about it. I just seriously gave them the money to shut them up. Didn't know what they were doing. 2 weeks later, I get an email that says I'd been appointed to the Government Affairs Committee. And I said, I don't know what the Government Affairs Committee is. And so I rolled down to the board and went to a meeting just to find out what it was. And the scales fell off my eyes. And I was a little astonished at how much work the Realtor Association was doing to protect and preserve people's ability to buy real estate. And I'm thinking, oh crap, I have been working and making a huge living because these people are down here doing this work. And it had never occurred to me that there were so many volunteers keeping the opportunities going while I was out there becoming number one, making a fortune in real estate. And after that realization hit me, I dove all in and became a very active volunteer, got very involved in learning about who we are as real estate professionals, what our trade association has done and is doing. And since that time, I've served in all kinds of committee capacities, and I have served as the state president for North Carolina. I was the national vice president in 2021. So I've been in all these capacities, and I look at all of it as a learning opportunity. And I'm sure you saw it the same way, that you have been selling a ton of real estate. And then when you get into that MLS advisory position, you're thinking, some of the people in here only log into MLS once a week. I log into it multiple times a day.
Yeah.
And then you start to realize there's some gaps, which is part of the reason I evangelize for volunteering so much, especially with people who are doing a lot of business. They are absolutely the ones who need to be in the room, because when things go sideways, which they're very chaotic right now, the ones who are most impacted are the top producers. And I'm not speaking down to those of y'all that are early in your career and you're doing a deal every 4 months. You're going to get there if you keep chasing it. But the people who do 200 sides, they have so many people's livelihood on the stake when things go sideways, and they have not been in these rooms. So that's kind of where my viewpoints have been, and are right now. It's a long answer to your question. So back to you, host.
No, you're good, actually. So, and to speak to that newer agent, I would 100% encourage them, just get in the room. Like, I would sit there serving water, because when I sat in a lot of those meetings, you're going to have three different types of people. You're going to have people that are brand new to real estate. Maybe their broker owner said, hey, you need to go to this meeting and be part of this because they just made them. You have second, people like us who are out in the field actually selling a lot of real estate and want to be involved and affect change. And they're kind of a hybrid. And then you have a lot of people who are old school. Maybe they're not transacting anymore, but they have 30, 40, 50 years experience. And I think that all three of those people serve a great purpose, right? The experienced people, you do not want to discount what they bring to the table, because they've been around a long time and they've seen transitions from the MLS books to the actual systems to all the issues that we've had. And the more things change, the more they stay the same. At the same time, those hybrid people can bring new ideas to those people and say, hey, listen, I understand the conversations that we're having, but like, this is pressing today. This is technology that's affecting our clients, and how are we going to mitigate it? And I think the newer people, the role that they're going to play is just be a sponge. Like, you will get a decade of experience sitting in those rooms, hearing the conversations happening between those first two groups, where I think that it's a huge opportunity for newer agents.
Oh, you're 1,000% right. Especially right now, there is a really high level of panic and fear amongst practitioners right now, because realtors are entrepreneurs who hate change, which is kind of hilarious how we live out that very interesting space. And because they don't like change, a lot of people have pulled back right now. They're angry online. They're typing in all caps with exclamation points, instead of leaning in to say, well, how do you make it through rough times? Those seasoned veterans, they know how to make it through. They were there for the savings and loan crisis and the Great Recession, and they lived through this transition from, as you mentioned, the book to smartphones. And then they watched the COVID markets, which none of us had ever seen an up market like we've seen since the COVID era started. And the flip side of that is that the seasoned vets love hearing from early career people. And in fact, I'm telling my classes all over the place, the biggest advantage right now is being early career, because you don't have to unlearn a bunch of bad habits. You don't have to be burdened by the way things have always been. But by the same token, if you understand why the industry evolved to the place it was in before it started becoming the target to be dismantled, you would understand why we should be protecting and preserving our associations for the future generations. It's absolutely both groups together. And to the brokers, I'm always grateful when there are brokers that tell somebody who is a new licensee or fresh to the business to get down there faster, because I wish I'd learned it faster. I wish I'd been involved sooner, because I could have shortcut my own learning curve, but also I could have been more impactful in my own community. It's an overlooked aspect of volunteer life, is that when you are the realtor who knows the most about what the realtors are doing for zoning and for affordability and development, what are we figuring out to make more opportunities where we live, you actually bring a huge amount of information to the listing appointment and to the buyer appointment. So you can actually take all the volunteer work, make real estate space better, and make you more profitable along the way. It's a win-win, win-win-win.
Yeah, actually, so the Professional Standards Committee was one of my favorites, because I got to see every consumer complaint that came in, every agent to agent complaint, and then how the rulings happened, when it got escalated to RICO, which is our governing body in Canada, and the penalties that were implemented. We actually were able to institute a fast fine policy, meaning we kept getting these cases for simple things like an agent wouldn't notify somebody that they weren't going to show a property. They pulled up to the driveway. The client said, I don't want to see it. And they just left, didn't leave a card and whatnot, or showing up early for appointments. Yeah, just call, like basic stuff that you and I take for granted. But unfortunately, our industry does a really poor job in training, and there's no standards. So what happens is the family gets their kids and their dogs and everybody out of their house. They get the house all show ready, and the agent doesn't show up. So instead of us creating case law every single time and going through weeks and weeks and weeks of, discovery and interviews and what happened here and what happened there, we saw patterns of simple things that we were like, why don't we just fine them immediately and escalate the fines? And then once they've had 3 fines, it goes to discipline, which is the big dog. And we noticed instantly a huge change in just the simple things that was driving consumers nuts. And that's the type of change that you can actually affect when you're involved at the grassroots level. You can say, you know what, we're sick of doing this. Here's a potential solution. Let's roll it out. Was there anything that you did during your time in leadership that was similar, or things that you saw in the industry that you really just kind of latched onto and kind of championed yourself?
Well, my big space has always been in the political policy space. And it's because I have always been interested in politics. And of course, the Canadian Real Estate Network got very involved in politics in 2017, I believe, is when we were working with your president at that time. I was, let's see, I think I was at some meetings with in Ontario when CREA got that really rolling. I think it was 17 or 16. I don't know what year it is now, but there's a reality that if the realtors don't do political policy work, it won't happen, because what we do is not sexy. I mean, if I think about big Canadian news stories, and I'm an American, I'm thinking about the trucker convoy. That's the biggest thing that comes to my mind over the last few years. And that was an outcry against political policy. And it only got traction because it was visible and it was impacting people's ability to drive and transport themselves to and from work. And it was just a fascinating moment to watch people speak up. Okay, so what in real estate policy is going to make anybody start a trucker convoy or speak up? You just don't see our issues being the kind that really galvanize people into action. Realtors get it because we're like, yeah, but if you don't fix this zoning issue, then the schools will be overrun and the water and sewer capacity won't be right and the roads. And we see all of the facets that are around real estate. So we have to be in the rooms to make sure that the decision makers don't muck it up for the entire community, knowing that if we're not there, there is no voice in the room, which allows our elected officials and the bureaucrats to do whatever they want. And so because I love politics and then I learned our policy, I realized that you can actually educate your peers about something that's boring on the surface, because we bring it to life. That's what realtors always do. We are communicators, we build relationship. And when we're able to go to our governing bodies and say, I know that there are no duplexes in this neighborhood. However, there is an empty corner lot where if somebody puts a duplex, it can act like 2 single family homes, but then we have added housing in our community, which is starved for rooftops. We're the ones that can communicate that story, because the neighbors are only going to galvanize to fight it. And we see this in the messaging around housing overall right now, that not in my backyard mindset, NIMBYism, the people who say we need it, but not here. Realtors like to come in and say, but how about this? And how about this? We are so skilled. Why wouldn't we bring our skills to bear in a space where we don't even get paid, but which is good for our community on the whole? So my special gift in volunteer world has been getting other people to bring their communities, their clients, their stories forward. And I'm watching people do things so much greater than I've ever done. And that's the other secret of volunteering, is you get to watch people get their eyes opened up and then they go run and they go next level. And nothing makes me happier than to see other people picking up the torch all over the place and running with it. Just like I was so excited when the Canadian realtors decided to get involved in policy work, because you needed to be heard in the capital. You didn't have a voice prior. And in fact, for all the people who are on this episode and have complained about the National Association of Realtors and how feckless they've been in these lawsuits, I don't disagree with you that they have absolutely handled this poorly. I absolutely agree with you, but it doesn't negate the value of the association on the whole. And I had a conversation yesterday with a professor actually in Montreal. She was asking me about our code of ethics as realtors and asked some really interesting questions. And then we got to talking about a case that's happening in New York, where you have this one street of homes and they're all old and beat down trailer houses. People have been there forever. But the state of New York wants to put a semiconductor plant there to create jobs and bring manufacturing back from Taiwan. And the government is acting like it's this wonderful, great thing. But those couple of people on that street are saying, what about us? And they're very small in comparison to the government and what the government wants. So a realtor by themselves, no association, wants to help these 5 homeowners. Well, they're not going to get paid because none of them are going to sell and none of them are going to buy. And so the realtor has limited resources to go in there and help, even though realtors want to. We are very wired to be empathetic and to be helpers. But the Realtor Association can step in and say, there's a case here that best and highest use is not whatever the government wants. It is that these people own a piece of land and should have a voice in what is theirs. And the realtors as an association can put forth an amicus brief. It's such a really visceral way to see how powerful we are on behalf of people we'll never serve, because our association stands in a really boring gap for everyday consumers. It's a cool thing that we do. And this goes back to where NAR's mistakes are kind of visible. There's not been enough storytelling about the good that we have done without being paid for it in our communities. And that's also where I hope everybody listening to this is feeling a little bit of fire in their belly about, well, this one time I had this client and we had to do this, and this one time this. Those are the stories that the world has to hear to impact the opinion of who realtors are. Just like with your professional standards work, your committee was listening to the consumers, creating new policies to tell the consumers, we do want to get better and we're actively going to do it by XYZ, and simultaneously telling members, we're going to do better and here's how it's going to look. That's how we change our reputation. It's not rocket science or media campaigns. It is individual agents telling better stories and behaving better amongst themselves so that consumers feel heard and seen and protected.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. I think there's a few roads I want to go down. One, I want to open up in a few minutes just a breakdown for the newer agent that doesn't understand why associations exist and how an association fits in, then a brokerage, then say maybe a team leader, and then an agent. So we'll talk about that ecosystem. What I want to talk about before that, though, is you touched on something that I'm telling a lot of people, my clients and other agents included, is, we're in Canada. I'm watching what's happening with NAR in the States. I've told my team, and I've sat in tons of trainings and meetings as to what's happening in the States, because eventually it's going to come to Canada. We had a big change in December called TRESA, and it was basically a massive regulatory change where we went from REBA 2002, which was our governing rules and code of ethics, to TRESA. And it changed how we have to engage with consumers. And now there's only two types of consumers. And this is getting a little technical for people listening. If you like geeking out on real estate, now's the time for you to listen. If not, skip this part. But there's clients, there were customers, and then there were self-represented parties. And a client was fiduciary duty. I am like your lawyer, like your doctor, anything you tell me, full confidence. Customer was, you called me on a listing. I was the listing agent, so I already had a client relationship, but you wanted me to write the contract, and I was in multiple representation. And I was making you sign a document that said, I'm not representing you. I'll do the paperwork, you can offer, but I'm representing my client. Very transparent. They got rid of that. So now it is client relationship only, or a self-represented party. But what's wild is you cannot offer any services to a self-represented party. I can't do paperwork for them. I can't do anything unless it's in service to my client. So what's happening to our industry is we're becoming like financial advisors, where if somebody asks me for information before, like you said, I would work for free for hours and hours and years, giving them appraisals on their property, going to their house, going to walk their farm, going to the city hall and getting information on zoning, and giving them a health checkup every year on the hopes that I get the listing one day. Now, before I even engage in any type of relationship like that, I'm making them sign a contract saying, hey, I'm like your financial advisor. Any advice I give you, if you act on it, I'm technically liable. It's a very different type of way of transacting. And I think ultimately what's going to happen to the consumers and fees with this whole lawsuit is it's going to cost consumers more, because as I'm itemizing all of the time that I'm putting in, my staff that I'm paying, in a pre-listing launch, it's about 25 hours, listing to contract, it's about 50, and then contract to close about another 25. Hey, if you don't want to pay me commission, you want to go billable hours, you're probably going to end up paying me more on top of marketing, staging, and everything else that you're going to pay, right? So where are your thoughts in terms of our profession and where we're headed?
Well, first of all, those changes to Canadian real estate, there is a Facebook group that I'm in where I think I might be the only American allowed in there because I feel kind of special. And they were getting, do what?
Is it real estate hacks?
No, this is... well, it's Realtors Against the Mandates.
Okay. Yeah, I was in there. I'm going to get you in hacks too. You'll love that group. I'll sneak you into that group. Let me just do that while you're chatting.
Jody is one of my favorite people to follow.
Okay.
And look, y'all can judge me all you want, but hey, whatever. So anyway, I was watching all the conversation about those changes because it again, this is what I said before, realtors are entrepreneurs who hate change, but sometimes we hate change because we already viscerally know it's not great for the consumer. And when we make consumers sign things before they're ready, which is now what we're being forced to do in the US and what you're already living through with your new policies, it's the consumer who needs to fight back. And I have said this over and over to the consumers who don't want to sign something with an agent until they feel a level of comfort, then you need to speak up, because the realtors are not bad guys for working for free all that time, trying to earn the trust and earn the business. That was how we have operated. And it gave the consumer a whole lot of choice that now the government's taken away from them. So there's a moment here where we as agents need to allow our clients and customers, past clients, to speak on our behalf. But with that being said, the mention you make of billable hours, I added this is a positive outcome of the changes to the industry. I added billable hours as an option for my sellers.
Mm-hmm.
Should have been just offering it side by side for years, but didn't do it. We were doing a traditional plan where we had negotiated percentage commission. And now I can say, well, you have two options. If we do traditional commission style, I take on the risk. That's how it's always been. I have taken on the risk. I've worked for free for a long time to do everything. And then I pay for the photos and the drone and the marketing to get you ready, hoping somebody will buy it and that you'll like those terms and that we can get through all of the extortion fees along the way and get to closing and the buyer will show up, or there won't be an ex-wife somewhere who won't sign. I do all of these things hoping. If you want to go the billable hours right, I've got an app, we've got a time clock. We're going to bill in 15-minute increments, every text, every email, every visit. And we're just going to boom, 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 knock it out. Every 30 days you get an invoice. And you might have an easy house because every seller thinks they have the best house.
The best house, yeah.
My house will be so easy. I'm sure it will, pumpkin. It'll be so easy. And so on my billable hours, we show two scenarios. One is the unicorn easy house, because every realtor gets one. So if you're early in your career, just know there's an easy one coming. We don't know when it's coming, but you should always know it's preceded by a horrible one and followed by the worst one ever. But you're going to get one easy one. So I show that to the consumer, and that's about 30 hours. And then I show them the one from hell that we literally just closed last month, which was 110 hours because we went through so many contracts and the repairs and the bids and all of the drama. And it was kind of hilarious because the one that was high hours on hourly billing is more than almost any purchase price of other properties. And the consumer that sees that in the appointment, this happened to me again on Monday, was like, what? Well, which house am I? And I said, baby, that's the thing. We don't know which house you are. You might be the easy one. Yeah. You might be the cash buyer. No inspections, no appraisals, no survey. But you also might have repair nightmares, buyers that come and go. Your brother and his ex-wife might be, I don't know who the problem is. And I said, you take the risk here. I take the risk here. And every seller I've presented that to has said, you take the risk. And so they're seeing our value, but it goes back to the storytelling. We really have never told about the hours that you're mentioning there. Yeah. I saw a stat. I don't know if you know who James Dwiggins is. He's the CEO of Next Home brand. Very outspoken leader in the industry. Very brilliant guy. He shared a stat last week that the consumer thinks we spend an average of 15 hours on a transaction. And I'm thinking, man, 15 hours? Not a chance, unless it's not 15 hours, but that's what they've seen. And we have that motivational poster. I don't think it's amongst your people on the wall, but you know the poster with the duck that's going along the surface, but underneath he's paddling like hell, which is how realtors have operated. Yep. We never tell the amount of work we put into the pre-listing, the amount of work we put into the prep, and into the thousands of conversations with possible co-broke agents, possible buyers, the buyer that didn't get pre-approved, the agent who ghosted us. There's all these hours that aren't even around the contract that the consumer accepts. And then we have to get through the process to get to closing. So the average is closer to 80 hours, but the consumer thinks we're at 15. And so we already have some cognitive dissonance there. So for anybody that's watching and listening to this, the immediate action you have to take is to stop acting like this is easy and start talking about I spend time learning about my community, learning about my market, so that when I meet you, I'm ready. So that when I meet you, I'm up to speed on what's happening in the regulatory environment. I'm up to speed on what consumer behavior is for marketing. I'm ready because I'm getting ready right now. That's more impactful than another post that says open house on Saturday from 12 to 2, or that says sold in 5 minutes with 14 offers. Like, your marketing has
Yeah.
gotten us into this problem, and agents have tried so hard to make it easy. We forgot that was devaluing us.
Yeah, and I think we're as culpable as anybody else. I tell people, take your own medicine, right? Like we are both cause and effect, but also the solution. That's the encouragement here is you don't have to sit there and wallow. You can create the standard and you can set the standard and force everybody else to keep up. Because really, if you ask yourself, have you ever sat down and quantified what you do for a client? Now, is it in the contract that you sign with them? And have you actually explained the contracts to them and what you're going to provide? Now you're actually in the transaction. Are you actually doing the things that you said you were going to do? Or are you sitting there doom scrolling TikTok instead of prospecting like you told them you were going to? And I think if we were truly honest with ourselves about what we're providing, it's not up to snuff and it's not up to the standard of what the consumer expects of us. But there's a huge opportunity in there because you and I know the top producers do. They actually work on their business plan. They take accountability and they stand in the gap and they educate. And I think you're going to have to, as somebody watching or listening to this, you're going to have to shut out the noise. You're going to have to not spend your time in negative spaces. Because when we met, one of my favorite things was that app, for the short time it was in existence, brought together some incredible people, and it was a marketplace of ideas. And no different than sitting in professional standards committees or on boards, I would be with some of my biggest competitors from a national perspective, and we would be sharing ideas. And their ideas weren't necessarily going to work for my model, but I would see what they were doing and it would make me keep up. And I think from a professional standards level or profession level, that's where we're at moving forward is, if you want to stay in this industry, you're gonna have to tighten up and you're gonna have to really look at, are you really a professional or are you somebody that just wanted to be like somebody on Selling Sunset? And I think everybody that is the Selling Sunset side is going to get washed out by the professionals, if not by the regulators, in my opinion.
Unless they are chosen by the consumer that wants that, in which case, more power to them. I hope that the person who picks the Selling Sunset kind of agent doesn't call me. I'm okay with that because we are still a competitive business. But to your point of sharing ideas with competitors and colleagues in the same space, it's the proof that the messaging on all of these changes, it's not going to do us any good coming from NAR or CREA. It's not going to do us any good coming from any brand. The only good that happens comes from each agent communicating to the people who watch them, because your market has this group of people that stare at you and say, what is happening with real estate? But they only listen to you because you're their trusted guy. Mm-hmm. I have people right here that only listen to me. I'm their real estate girl. They don't care what the headlines say. So when you remember that of all the realtors that are out there, there is this subset of eyes that is directly on you. You have to ask yourself, what are you telling them? Are you telling them that you're taking a moment in your business to get better, that you're chasing excellence? Well, there's nobody in the public that's going to dismiss you for that. They'll say, hey, heck yeah, you are already my favorite. You're my good one. You're getting better. Woo woo. And you'll find that your competitors don't say that. Well, now you're going to start to see the differentiation and the segmentation really take off. And much earlier, you made a point that it may cost the consumer more in this new world of real estate. Okay, frankly, I have sold over 4,000 houses in my career at 24 years in. I do policy and politics work, and I have gone to every class available. Yes, I'm worth more than somebody who got in last year and has sold 4 houses. And I love those agents and I wish them all success. They are not me, and they are nowhere near my level of knowledge and expertise. So I should cost more. And the consumer should know that there is a difference. You can get the person with hustle who is learning and has all the potential in the world, and that should cost you less than the person who brings everything to the table. So when we look at those rates in my office, we have created a different scale now of the amount of experience somebody has so the consumer can choose. It's going to cost you more to have Leigh Brown than to have one of my agents. They're highly trained. They are highly ethical. They are excellent professionals, but they don't have what I have. And that's okay for me to say, and it's okay for the consumer to have that choice. And all of this goes back to that professionalism piece. If you really want to maximize your business, you've got to create something that nobody else can replicate. So what is that going to look like for you? And that's different agent by agent and office by office. We have this opportunity right now that is crazy amazing. I mean, what a great opportunity to redefine ourselves in light of all the negativity, to be the light in the darkness. This is your moment.
You're going to see more, I think, refined business models come out of the next couple of years than ever before. And you touched on so many things. I'll go back to the selling sunset comment because I wasn't trying to insult the people on that show, but what I meant was people
I do. They drink box wine, Justin.
It's people can live the life that they want to live. I'm okay with that. What I'm talking about is the agents that are cosplaying being a real estate agent, where being a real estate agent is pretty simple. It's, do you know the market like the back of your hand? Are you an effective marketer and negotiator? And are you connected? Because that's what people pay for. Right. And to your point, like if you want access, we're being very selective about the clients that we take on and the clients that we are gently offboarding, because we're realizing that our resource deployment against those relationships, I would rather work with less people and do better quality work than just work with everybody. And I'm not the cheapest agent that you're going to get. But if you care more about what you're paying me than what you're going to put in your pocket, can't help you. But if you care about what you're making, then we can definitely have a discussion. But that's a discussion for a separate day. Before I get you out of here, I definitely want to touch on one more major topic. And that's really just break down organizationally, like an org chart, National Association of Realtors, how the city boards or state boards would work, brokerages, team leaders. The reason, and I'll prompt you with this before you get into it. Back in the day, like your brokerage was essentially doing what team leaders are doing now. You would go work at a brokerage, they'd provide you training, they'd provide you leads. And now I find that most brokerages are simply transaction coordination and maybe an answering service. Now team leaders are training, branding, and leads. And now boards are in a position where they're scrambling for position and relevance. And then you have the National Association of Realtors, which other people are now coming in and saying, we're going to create our own. And what does that look like? So break down an org chart of why did the associations exist and how would a new agent understand all of this craziness?
Well, I mean, isn't Alberta trying to secede? Did I hear that? Or
Quebec, I grew up in Montreal, actually, of all things. So Quebec tried to separate back in the 90s when I was there. And
they always try to, though. It's the whole French language thing. They're better than everybody else. I mean,
Canada's got some complexities to it, especially right now. But
well, I usually call Canada America's evil top hat, but you notice I've refrained from that today, except for right now.
So I use that we're Canada's goofy uncle that you run into at every family reunion, and you kind of forget that he's in your family, and you kind of like him, but he's kind of goofy at the same time. So that's Canada.
I thought that was Newfoundland. Okay, just kidding.
Yeah, maybe.
So anyway, the organization, you're exactly right. Teams have become brokerages inside brokerages. Agents themselves fail to understand the purpose of the brokerage. The purpose of the brokerage is because you're a bunch of renegades, and the brokerage is supposed to provide a certain level of supervision to keep you from going off the rails, to make sure that you're following the regulatory guidelines of the licensing body, in addition to the ethical requirements of the association. That's the broker's job. So for agents who avoid their broker, the broker should have a big red alarm going on, because they're supposed to know what's happening with their marketing and to be available when there is a situation with a client. Now, many of the team leaders are operating in that capacity, but they don't have the protections from the liability side when they're not the supervising broker. So there has to be a better understanding of who's in charge of whom, so that if a consumer complaint comes in, is a team lead going to be on the hook or the supervising broker? The agent underneath often has no clue. And frankly, the consumer is even less educated on that. That being said, with everything happening in real estate right now, every agent should have heard from their broker multiple times about how to adapt, what's changing, is there any change to behavior or process that should be happening. And if you're an agent that has not heard from your broker or team leader about all this kerfluffle, you should hightail it out of there, because that puts you at risk. Now, that being said, in our models, the beauty of the team is you have that tighter access to the training and to the lead generation for those who are still learning how to prospect and lead generate. And that can be good as long as that newer person is getting enough guidance not to mess up that consumer's transaction. Because one of my complaints forever has been that we give someone a license and we turn them loose and tell them to go find somebody, and I'll answer your questions as you go. But for that consumer, that's their biggest financial instrument. And there should be a lot more hands-on training. So the closer the team lead or the broker are to the agent, the better off that agent is, especially in their first 5 years. Now, from the association perspective, of course, all of us belong to multiple levels. The local level is your boots on the ground. It is your province, your county, your state. It is where you live. What specific laws and rules apply right where you are? What is happening here with building and with builders and with code? What is happening with water and sewer and infrastructure? What is happening with schools? What is happening with everything with work from home? Because if I look around the US, there's a different level of broadband in some areas than in others. And of course, Canada, you've got parts of the country that are very glad to be off the grid. So what does that consumer expect? And that's what your local association does, is stay close to that so that you can do real estate where you are. And then the next level up, that state level, is more regulatory level information. Where the job's going to be, what is the economic impact of property taxes and taxes on services for what our commissions are taxed at. We are a wild profession full of micro entrepreneurs who have to work together at those levels to keep from being taxed out of existence, because that's what happens in so many scenarios. The less united you are, the more of a target you are. So make no mistake about that. This turmoil in real estate is making a lot of regulatory and bureaucratic agencies look at real estate as a wonderful taxable pot, because if we stop working together and stop working as an association, we become very easy targets, which takes me to the National Association of Realtors and the CREA, the Canadian Real Estate Association. What do you do at those top levels of government? Well, you're talking about the factor on property rights. What's going to happen with national programs, with mortgage-backed securities? What's going to happen with, in the US, one of our ongoing issues is flood insurance. What are you going to see with eminent domain? What do you see with energy production? Because energy production actually impacts real estate because of pipelines and pipeline access. So you start realizing all of those things are intertwined with real estate, and that's why you stay involved. The perk of being involved is we can work together to be more professional. We can work together to raise the level of ethics in the industry. But at the core of what we do, we're a united front to make sure that the neighbors in our communities still have access to a pathway of buying and selling real estate. And that's a high level picture when you're talking the national level. And then when you start talking those levels closer to you, you start to look around. How many realtors are involved? The number is really, really small. It's 1% to 2% that are involved at all. So then you have to ask yourself this: what if the person who's involved is a crazy pants? Well, then you weren't in the room. And so the crazy person gets to drive the train. I won't make any comments on Canadian politics right there. But if the rational, reasonable, common sense people leave the room, then you can't be a part of the decision-making process. And this is the very beginning of our conversation. If you want things to be better, if you want them to look different, you don't take your toys and leave. You get into the sandbox and figure out how to be a force there. And being a force doesn't mean throwing sand. It's why I might be irritated with NAR, but I'm not trying to tear it down. That doesn't solve anything. Does it need restructure? Absolutely. Do we need refocus? 1,000%. Do we have strategic drift? Absolutely. It doesn't mean I quit and run away. And when I look at competing organizations that come up, I value competition. I think it's good for everyone to have to really get thoughtful about your value, which is what every realtor should be doing right now, defending what you charge to the consumer. But then I look at the cynical picture and I say, if somebody's unhappy with the trade association, are they going to join a trade association? I mean, probably not, because there's not a value case for that yet. Now, maybe they'll create one, or maybe a third party will come up. Who knows? I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but I do know that I had a conversation today with someone who's very influential in the media, and he's asking me questions about how we got to this point. And I realize my role is not done, and I don't know what my ultimate impact is going to be. And you don't either. Mm-hmm. All of us have to keep learning and evolving as we go, because we don't know what the end game looks like, because we're not there yet. Quitting doesn't make things better. It just means you gave up on the process, and you can give up on a process and start a new one. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're that person who walks away from this, I don't want to hear another word from you about organized real estate. I don't want to hear another word about you about the National Association or the Canadian Association. If you're going to complain about it, be in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. So we went through something on our board level, like one of our boards. So we're on 3 different boards, and there was a MLS switchover. So they were choosing to leave one system and go to another system. And there was a massive divide right down the middle. They had to call a special AGM for it. It was a whole thing. And the 2 sides had fallen into the identity politics of, okay, apparently that's a thing now. Sorry, if you're listening to the audio podcast, I gave the peace sign and some balloons just popped up. It's an Apple. So if you're watching this and you do thumbs up on an Apple device, it'll do all kinds of crazy things. So it may be confusing for the audio listeners to the podcast. Now's a great time to share and subscribe to the podcast.
Be on the video version because you definitely needed to see that.
For sure. So go watch the video version on YouTube if you want to see it. But going back to my story. So anyways, we basically had a divide right down the line, and it was both sides villainizing each other and just burning bridges, saying and doing things they should not have been doing, saying very nasty, mean things to the leadership, and the leadership kind of not responding, causing a bit of a rift in between. So I actually called both sides. One side called me, wanted me to sign this petition. The other side called me and wanted me to support them. And I gave them both quite a bit of medicine. I empathized with their situation. I said, I understand. And I actually get your perspective and why you feel the way that you feel because of how A, B, and C was handled. Here's a path forward where we can find success as an organization and pull together on this. And it doesn't happen by you villainizing the other people. It happens by us coming up with a solution that is a compromise between both sides. And you talked about Canadian politics. That's probably the biggest issue that we had over the last couple of years was we had leadership that was deciding that instead of coming up with a compromise with a nation divided, it was keeping the nation divided, making it worse and worse. And I think that's why people feel the way that they feel about associations and why you see the reactions online. We'll end this podcast with the idea, though, that their solution is not to involve yourself in the identity politics, not to involve yourself in the argumentative, negative stuff you see online. That is the vocal minority. There are amazing people affecting change, giving good feedback, coming up with creative solutions. So hit them with a quick action plan. I'm a newer agent. I'm doing 10 to 15 deals a year. I want to get involved at a board level. I want to get involved in my organized real estate community. Leigh, what are my action items?
First of all, figure out what part of real estate you dig. If you dig politics and you call your local board and ask what's going on with government affairs or any legislative bodies, if they say, we don't have any openings on those committees, because that can happen. Mm-hmm. Some of them are limited by their bylaws. Some are just a little bit snooty about when they let you into the room.
For sure.
That's when you say, are the meetings open? And they will say yes. And then you go take your happy self down there and sit in the gallery. There is no reason to think that you have to be in charge of something in order to participate in it. In fact, one of the ways that I got involved in some of these committees that I've done in the past, I showed up in the gallery and I sat in the room and listened to the topics at hand and looked around at the leadership to decide if that's where I wanted to invest my time. So you can go actually test the waters in some of these areas. Now, maybe you're the person that says, I'm allergic to politics, can't stand it, keep me out of it. Great. Find out what the membership committee is doing and the events committee is doing. They're often trying to find ways to get more realtors to show up and work together and learn together and have these interactions. Because one thing I can tell you, early career people from the old person seat, you will have the best transactions of your business with the person on the other side that you've already met in person. When you've met them and you know them and you've hugged their neck and had a cocktail with them, you have a much better transaction than if they are a nameless, faceless person over text that you don't have a human connection to. So there is a huge benefit to your buyers and sellers by showing up. And so for you that have that bubbly event personality, get involved in the membership and event side. For those of y'all that are super nerds, you need to be on the finance and audit committees. You need to be on the bylaws committee. If you actually read realtor emails, please sign up for the bylaws committee, because we have a lot of volunteers down there who are in charge of governance documents who don't read complete books. And we need to have people in the bylaws committee that read things and can make suggestions to make us more efficient. There's so many ways to be involved, but you need to be where you belong. And I am of that mindset that we should remove some of these rules that say you have to be on X, Y, and Z committee before you can serve as a leader, because the person who cannot balance their bank account has no business on the finance committee, even though they may be a successful realtor. And that's where you have to know you first. But most importantly, if you're not ready to serve on a committee because you're nervous, you don't feel like you know enough yet, you just are an introvert by nature. I'm an introvert by nature. I have fought my way out of that in order to grow my business and to be a more impactful leader, so you can grow through it. But you have to find a way to drag yourself to the association meetings. I don't care if it's general membership or a lunch and learn or cocktail hour. Get yourself there in person. That's where everything starts changing. And especially if you're a younger person, I'm going to speak to the Zoomers that might be in here, the millennials that love Zoom. Zoom is not your friend. You have to get off of these online tools that have caused you to detach from human relationships and get back in the room. Because frankly, I will tell you that best business I've ever had comes from the hallway conversations, the lines in the ladies' room, when we have a chat at the coffee machine while we're there for a common purpose. Get in the room. That's my single biggest advice. Please, please, please do it. And then, by the way, if you're early career and you want to do more deals, this market that we're heading into, biggest opportunity of your career. Because a lot of the seasoned people who are burned out, exhausted, and kind of thinking, I can't do this again. I can't do any more change. I'm out. I'm done. They might be looking for you. So why not reach out to a 30-year or 40-year realtor and ask if they'd love to have a young whippersnapper come learn from them, to be their young partner, to take their excess leads and come just drink from the fire hose. You would be surprised how many agents would love to sell you their business as they pursue another thing in life. And also, somebody's been in for 30 and 40 years. They're not going to prospect right now. They're just not going to do it, because their phone will organically ring. If you've been in the business more than 10 years, your phone just rings. People know you're in real estate, which means that those people are not prospecting. You have to prospect when nobody else is doing it, and that's where the business is located.
I still got my shovel and I'm still prospecting, and I've been in it over 10 years, Leigh. I appreciate you very much. Where can people find you and connect with you?
Well, I like Instagram the best, but I'm on X and Facebook and LinkedIn and TikTok and all the places. But I am Leigh Brown, or Leigh Thomas Brown, on all those accounts. And I pride myself to being the one realtor who looks like my headshot. So look for the swoopy bottle blonde hair and you can find me.
Same voice and same personality. I appreciate your professionalism, and iron sharpens iron. That's why I do this podcast. I love having people on that thrive and really take pride in their craft, right? I talk about all these people on the wall behind me before we went live, and they're crafts people at what they do. You can be a carpenter, you can be a musician, electrician, you can be a singer. We happen to be real estate agents. If you are a real estate agent listening to this, please jump onto YouTube, leave a comment, share the episode with somebody that you got some value with, and more than anything, connect with Leigh. Go send her a DM, listen to her podcast, and give her one nugget of how she helped you today and make a real human connection. Thanks, Leigh. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.